오늘도 이른 아침에 이렇게 많이 나와주셔서 대단히 감사합니다. 그럼 제가 편의상 영어로 회의를 진행하도록 하겠습니다. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I suppose we can draw very valuable lessons from others' failures as well as from their successes. In fact, I was invited to Beijing, where an international conference was held, and I was asked to talk about Korea's the financial crisis of the late 1990s. I talked about major causes and major policy failures with the hope that China will not make the same mistake, and so that they can avoid future financial crisis. This morning, we have Professor Jürgen Donges, who will talk about the recent underperformance of German economy. The German economy, which was the outstanding success story in the post-World War II era, is not performing as well as it should. And this morning, I'm sure the Professor Donges will tell us what are the major causes and what are the major structural problems German economy have today, so that we Koreans, particularly policymakers, can learn valuable lessons from this lecture. I personally think that we should learn a lot from the recent German experience. Because I say this because in my view, there seems to be tendency actually moving toward that direction rather than changing the course away from some of the major problems, some of the major causes for the German economic performance. Professor Jürgen Donges was with us before, so I don't want to waste much time in introducing him very long. But I just want to remind you the fact that he is still with the University of Cologne in Germany. He is one of the most respected economists in Germany, in fact, all over the world. He has been with this university for many years, and before that he was with the Kiel Institute for World Economics, which is the leading think tank for not only Germany but the rest of the world in terms of economic policies and economic medicine. He served the German government with his various advisory capacities. One of the most important positions he had in this advisory capacity for the German government was his membership in the German Council of Economic Experts, known to the German Five Wise Men group. Actually, he was with this council for a decade, 10 years. And at the end, he chaired this very, very important advisory body in Germany. Besides that, he'd been serving on various government's important councils and committees. He also has has been consulting closely with various multilateral institutions, including the World Bank and OECD and others. Of course, he has written many books and articles regarding mostly the German economy and European integration and the economic development and the world trading system and so forth. With this, I would like to invite Professor Donges to share his enlightening views on the German economy and its implications for Korea. Please join me in the welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm quite pleased to be here again in Seoul. So this time it's a very short visit. I arrived yesterday and I have to leave at noon again. But nevertheless, I want to talk a little bit of my country. As you mentioned, Mr. Sarkong, a country which once was a locomotive in the European Union, but also in the world economy. And I remember that when I talked here 10 years ago, something like this, on the reunification of Germany, just on reunification, at that time I was quite confident that the German unification would just happen, not because politicians had planned it, but it just happened, because the people wanted it. At that time, I was confident that unification would be a success story. Today, I have to paint a somewhat different picture, because I have to talk about a troubled economy, which has become the laggard in the European Union and in the Eurozone. Economy which has been overtaken by other countries in terms of income per capita. Countries like Ireland, Netherlands, even Austria. Austria, our southeast neighbor, which traditionally behind, but even Austria has overtaken Germany. So, what are the reasons for that? And although I will not really analyze implications for the Korean economy because I'm not so much familiar with your country, but perhaps you yourself may see the implications in the sense, please do everything, do not things which Germany does. I think this could be a good proposal. Avoid our mistakes. And I will talk about these mistakes. After the reunification boom, we had a reunification boom, you remember that 10 years ago, I explained it, in 1990 and 1991. Rapid growth of the German economy in terms of 5.75%, something like this, real GDP. But after this reunification boom, Germany became, as I mentioned, the slowest growing country in the European Union. If we take the period 1995 to 2005, real per capita GDP increased in Germany just 1.1% per year. 1.1% per year. As compared to 2.1 in the Euro area, excluding Germany, in the United States, and it's even less than in Japan, you know, the country which until recently shared a similar fate of persistent growth flatness with Germany, but even Japan has a higher rate of growth, 1.4% on average in this period. And of course, if we compare the German performance with China, India, Korea, and so on, it would be much far away with that. Now, there are two indicators which make it clear what the problem is, or where the problem is. apart from the fact that, for example, this year we have rather rapid growth, 2% perhaps for GDP, which is still less than the average of the European Union, but it's more than over the last couple of years. But this is just business cycles. I'm focused long-term, the prospects. And for that, there are two indicators which really make it clear that Germany is a tough economy. The first indicator refers to the potential growth, not the real GDP, the potential output growth. And here, this rate has flattened significantly since the mid-90s, and the reason is a lack of investment in Germany. Potential output is generated by investment of business, and not by demand. So we have now a rate of growth in the order of 1% per year. In the 80s it was 2%. In the Eurozone without Germany is 2.5%. In the United States 3% is also pretty low. But potential output means. Then the second indicator is labor market. Germany once was a full employment economy in the early 70s. We had to hire a great number of labor, up to 10% or even more. 10% of labor force was imported in Germany. Today we are an unemployment economy, and with a very specific characteristic which is quite unique among OECD countries, and this is what's called the wretched effect, which means that unemployment in Germany, which had risen in a recession, was not reduced sufficiently during the subsequent boom, with the consequence that the next recession was started from a higher level of unemployment. And if we look at the process over the last 20-25 years, we can observe that unemployment has stepwise ratcheted upward from 0.7% unemployment in 1970 to 7.3% in 1991 to 11.7% in 2005. The second characteristic of this unemployment situation is that two-thirds of this unemployment is structural. It's not related to business cycle affairs, but is structural by nature, and reveals that labor has become too expensive in relation to much productivity. You should know that in Germany, wages and work time are not determined by market force. It's quite different from the United States, for example, or Great Britain. But it underlies a complex negotiation process between trade unions and associations. And as a number of studies has shown recently, wages in Germany have not been adequately differentiated among sectors, regions, qualifications, productivities, and so on. And this is quite a problem in a world of globalization and internet, so on, in which you need a lot of differentiations because firms, companies, and employees are affected quite differently. In East Germany, to be sure, wage costs are much too high, and in all Germany, wages for unskilled labor are excessive. We have labor legislation, and here perhaps there are some parallels to your country, which makes the labor market very rigid, and this dampens demand for labor by companies. And at the same time, we have a very generous system of unemployment benefits which reduces search intensity of without a job. All in all, we have now the most recent figures close to 40%, 38 years, of the registered unemployed are long-term unemployed. This means without a job for more than 1 year, 38. In 1991, when reunification took place, long-term unemployment amounted to 28%. So just we added 10 percentage points in 15 years. And to this, we have to add all those which are not registered in the official unemployment statistics because they are involved in support programs of the labor office, or because they are in the underground economy. The underground economy is the most dynamic sector in Germany right now. I'm talking Germany, not of Italy. 18% of GDP is now underground economy. So if we take all these figures together, I can state that Germany is lacking at least 7 million jobs in the regular, 7 million jobs. Now, this problem, the low potential output growth and the high structural unemployment are, in my view, primarily homemade problems. Homemade means they are rooted in an extensive welfare state. Just to give you some figures on that, 1/3 of GDP, 1/3, 33% of GDP is spent for public social products. And if we compare this with public spending on investment in human capital, public investment in human capital right now is less than 5%. 33 versus 5%. This 5% would be something to add to potential output and to growth, investment in human capital, while social spending is just consumption. It doesn't add to economic growth. The share of public sector in GDP stands at 48%. It's also a very interesting figure because recently the European Central Bank, in its monthly bulletin released in April of this year, has shown that the optimal size of government spending to assure an efficient supply of public goods in Germany would be in the order of 20% of GDP. Not 48, but 20%. So these are the figures. But the problem behind the figures is much more serious. And it is that when you have such an extensive welfare state, you get people used to claim social benefits and to protect their vested rights. And you induce well-organized pressure groups to act as rent seekers and rent defenders. And this is quite serious because you create habits which then becomes very difficult to change. Marginal income taxation, together with social insurance contributions, have been driven upward to more than now 50% of the average wage earner. In no other OECD country, including Korea, the tax burden on labor is as high as in Germany. It sometimes appears as, you may remember this book by Michael Olson on the rise and decline of nations. Very interesting to read, because this book explains how a nation can rise, but also how it can decline if you make too many mistakes in your public policies and your institutions. And it sometimes seems that as if we in Germany would like to confirm that Olson is right, that we pay too much attention in Germany to distributional targets rather than to efficiency aspects which a healthy and dynamic economy needs so much. Whenever we discuss these days in Germany a reform measure in any field, the first question always is distributional. Who is the winner? Who is the loser? Instead of asking first, does this reform solve a problem? And then we can ask whether there are losers who may need some public support. No, we first ask who are the losers and the winners, then we discuss, over days, weeks, months, about this distributional thing, and at the end, we never get a good solution for the problem. In the public debate, the homegrown problems are often laid down, by leading politicians who assert that it's nothing unusual for highly developed countries to have a flat growth rate, and sometimes they even insinuate that German economy, being a mature economy, is already where the others want to arrive. And in the light of the traditional neo-classical theory of economic growth, in which the marginal productivity of investment declines and technological progress is modeled exogenously, one can argue it in this way. But now we have the modern theory of economic growth, endogenous theory of economic growth, which shows us that the crucial determinant of economic growth is not only real capital, real investment, but it is investment in human capital. Human capital is the precondition for increasing productivity. You also have right now a problem of productivity in this country, as I read yesterday somewhere, and we know that in order to rise the levels of productivity, you have to improve your stock of human capital. There are no other way to do it. And if we look at the endowment in Germany with skilled workers, solid research, development capacity, comprehensive economic infrastructure, highly divisive business sector, and so on, we can say that there is absolutely no reason why the economy should grow as slowly as it does. The economic growth is below its possibilities. Now there is one very popular argument in the policy debate is that this flat growth rate is a result, among other reasons, is a result of a very German specific reason, in the sense that the German reunification process does require high financial West-East transfer payments, which encumber economic activity like a heavy mortgage. And it is true that the costs of unification are unprecedented. On the average of the past 10 years, the public transfers from the West to the East amounted to about 75 billion euro annually. 75 billion euro annually, which equals 4% of West Germany's GDP, and with no sign of abating. 4% of GDP is the transfer from West to East. But this is not clearly the main problem. The main problem is that these transfers have been financed partly by a new public debt, with the result that government debt has increased markedly. Pre-unification debt to GDP ratio stood at 42%, and now we are in the order of 67%. There's one problem, the increase of public debt. The second problem is that the overwhelming part of these transfers have been destined to consumption. Social insurance benefits, mainly consumption, rather than for investment. So that the potential output has not been enlarged as it was initially expected. It is true that economic reconstruction of former Germany has achieved considerable progress, in particular with regard to infrastructure, which is quite modern in East Germany, and the industry mix. However, the foreign hopes of the leading politicians of the time, saying that the catching up process would be quite rapid, these hopes were disappointed. Per capita GDP in East Germany is now at 67% of the level of West Germany. It was 35% in 1991, so there has been some conversion, but still it's not yet completed. This conversion process has come to standstills in the late 90s. Every year we can observe that economic growth in East Germany is more or less the same as in West Germany. It should be more rapid, but it isn't. And in some years even it was slower. An unemployment rate in East Germany is now in the order of 18% of the labor force. It nearly doubles for Germany, and it's far the highest in the European Union, despite massive migration of people from the East to the West. In spite of that, we still have this very high level of unemployment in East Germany. Now, the explanation of this high cost of reunification relates to mistakes made in economic policies. Probably the greatest mistakes, and I talked about this on my lecture on reunification 10 years ago, but it's always good to remember that, just in case you also get the reunification, is related to the exchange rate policy at the time. Against all warnings of economists, including the German Central Bank, the Bundesbank, there was much a too generous conversion rate of Eastmarks into Deutschmarks, because particularly the wage and salary rate of 1-to-1 was applied, although fundamentals would have suggested quite different rate productivity levels were low in Germany to apply this ratio. The consequence for the companies in East Germany was that for them the German mark was appreciated in the order of 300 to 400%. I mean, even the Japanese firms in their best days, would have not afforded such an appreciation of the currency. And companies still are suffering from this exchange rate shock. Then we made a mistake in everything related to the promotion of private investment. There was too much promotion and wrong promotion, particularly in the construction sector, with the result that we fostered capital intensity in production in East Germany, and at the same time a lot of excess capacities in the construction sector. And then we made great mistakes in the wage policies by trade unions and in trade associations, because they pushed in their collective bargaining the wages in East Germany up to levels in West Germany, and ignored that labor productivity in Eastern firms could not follow that rapidly, with the result that unit labor costs in manufacturing are still higher than 100%, are still higher than in West Germany, and as they don't have any longer an exchange rate to compensate for this higher unit labor costs, it's very difficult for companies there to export. But this really creates a problem. There's then another explanation for the flat growth, which is related to monetary policy in the Eurozone, but I will not talk about this here. It's on the written version of my paper. But turn now to a different issue, which is very central in the public debate which we have in Germany. And this is that, on the one hand, Germany reveals a high current account surplus. It's very, very successful as an export nation. And at the same time, we have difficulties in attracting investments from abroad and in convince our firms in Germany to invest in Germany and not abroad. Since we have surplus in the trade account, in the current account, and the deficit in the capital account. And this needs some explanation. Now, as far as the export activity is concerned, this is really the dynamic part of the German economy, apart from the underground economy which I mentioned. The world market share in commodity exports is still very high, about 9.8% recently, in spite of the emerging exporting countries such as China. And to be sure, the export sector contributes directly and indirectly significantly to capital formation and manufacturing production. In Germany, every fourth job, about 9 million jobs, is linked to export, and the export share in GDP is 40%, which is probably one of the highest among the European Union member countries. So there's no doubt that the export sector in Germany is a very important sector, and in particular so as the German export industry is specialized according to comparative advantages: car industry, mechanical industry, engineering industry, pharmaceuticals, I mean investment goods in general, you know all this, you know things. Now leading politicians and trade unionists, knowing these figures, which I just have mentioned, are now saying, well, Germany is the world export champion. To be exact, they should say second champion after that. Well, let's say world exporting champion. And if you look only at this export side of the German economy, then this gives a better shape to the economic performance of the country than if you look only from the growth and employment perspectives, as I did at the initial of this lecture. Now, when we analyze the German export dynamics, we have to take into account a number of aspects in order to be more cautious when praising the successes. The first aspect, which obviously is not yet in the heads of politicians, is that more than 40% of the German exports are destined to member countries of the Eurozone. So we have here an exchange of goods based on the division of labor within a common currency area. This should not be counted as exports. The German delivery of goods to Spain or France is as little an export as the delivery of goods within the United States from California to Florida or Illinois. It's not export. It's only because in Europe, our foreign trade statistics have not yet been adapted to the fact that we have now a common currency area between different nations, and therefore we still count this as an export. But obviously it is not. And here the German companies benefit from the fact that there is no exchange risk anymore for this 40% of export activities. Exchange risk, which we had in past times, you know, when the Deutschmark once and again was pushed upwards in an appreciation direction without relations to changes in fundamentals. And when the currency appreciates, of course, this impairs the price competitiveness of exports. But there's a second aspect which is even more important and which is already another indicator for my main thesis that something is going wrong in Germany. And this is that an increasing share of export production which takes place in Germany consists of imported intermediate products and services. Today, the imports which are included in exports account for 40%, as compared to 25% 15 years ago. So our export production increases its share of imported parts, components, accessories and so on from 25 to 40% in just 15 years. And this means that the export induces value added rises at a slower pace than export volume does. So that the famous label "Made in Germany," launched by German export firms to signalize the high quality of their products, suggests to the consumer something that is not anymore what it once was. A very extreme example to illustrate this point is the famous Porsche car Cayenne, which you know probably. 90%, many people think that this is a German car, and that this car is produced in Germany, in Leipzig, in East Germany. It isn't. 90% of this car is produced in Slovakia. 90%. And then the assembly and so on takes place in Germany, just 10%. So if you buy this car, take into account that you are not buying a German car. You're buying a car made in Slovakia. Now, how should we assess this development? There are two ways to assess it. One is positive, one is negative. It is positive if this increase in the imported shares reflects changes in the vertical, now in the vertical, not horizontal, in the vertical specialization through the international division of the production process. This is welfare raising because this would mean that the different economies are taking or are making use of their comparative advantage. So this is okay, this is all right, according to all what we know from the theory of international trade. But the negative aspect is that as far as the specialization in the downstream stages of industrial production is derived from a new entrepreneurial strategy, which consists in reducing costs, especially labor costs, and relocating the labor-intensive segments of production abroad via offshoring or via outsourcing, then Germany has got a problem of over-specialization into the capital-intensive export industries. And this type of specialization is accompanied by a decline of employment. It means that the labor which is set off by the export industry will not be absorbed by other sectors, but has to be fostered by the social security system. And this part of export growth reduces welfare. It's not good news, but there's bad news. There are renowned German economists, like the president of the IFO Institute of Economic Research, Professor Zinn, who is arguing that Germany may evolve in the direction of a bazaar economy if this trend continues. From a company's point of view, this development is not bad because you can make a lot of money. But it creates problems for the country because it makes it more difficult to return to overall higher employment levels. And therefore I think that the self-praising Germany as the world export champion of exports comes up to self-deception. Now, having said this, I come to this controversial question, what is possible, or what it means to have this coincidence of export surplus in the current account, and at the same time say that Germany as a location for investment is a weak economy. It sounds like a contradiction, but it isn't, in my view at least. As far as the exports are concerned, the German company have gone over the last couple of years through a painful restructuring process. They have reduced costs, they have adjusted production capacities and personnel, they have invested in product innovation and in next generations of computer software for enterprise and consumer applications. I mean, they have done everything a company should do in times of globalization and internet to be competitive and to become even the world market leader in its field. Behave like a Schumpeterian entrepreneur, take risks and then penetrate new markets. Then, of course, the export business works well, as I mentioned, even in times in which the euro is strong, as it happens since a couple of months. And then, of course, the balance of payment reveals the current account surplus. But the counterpart of this current account surplus is a deficit in the capital account. And I'm not talking about this ex post relationship between the two accounts, which always holds. This is not the point here. The point is the ex ante microeconomic context, which is based on the theory of intertemporal utility maximization. And which means we have to ask, how are the individual decisions regarding consumption today or saving today and consumption tomorrow? Suppose an individual, a German, takes a decision to save part of his income and to consume tomorrow. And he will do it when he thinks that the marginal utility of consumption tomorrow exceeds the marginal utility of consumption today. This is quite trivial. As a matter of fact, private saving in Germany amounts to 10.5% of disposable income, which is quite a high ratio in Europe. Now, his savings can be placed for investment projects at home, what happens, but it can also be invested abroad. And private savings will be invested abroad if the expected profit return there is higher than the expected profit return at home. In this case, the balance of payment of the home country of Germany, in our example, will report a capital export by direct investment, portfolio investments, or loans. But now we turn to the importing country, let's say the United States. The capital inflow in this receiving country means that residents, in this case the Americans, will be able to import more goods, and among those goods will be also goods coming from the capital exporting country, Germany. This means that in a globalized market with free international movement of capital, it is the flow of purchasing power which sets in first. Because this individual decision at the beginning of an individual in Germany not to consume today, not to save. And subsequently, this flow will be followed by the flow of goods and services. I think this is a very important point because you always read in the newspapers, you know, for example, the United States. The United States have a current account deficits and they have to finance it by capital inflow. This is wrong. The United States are attractive for capital inflows, and this allows Americans, you know, to consume more imported goods than they otherwise would be. So quite different view of the balance of payment. And the same on the other side applies for Germany. The capital account governs the current account, and this is something what the eminent Austrian economist Eugen von Böhm-Barwerk has explained already about 90 years ago. It's an economic theory, very well established model. So this means that the current account surplus in Germany cannot taken for valid as a good indicator of Germany's international competitiveness as in investment location. And as a matter of fact, the recent report by the World Bank on doing business, which just was published 2 weeks ago, has ranked Germany on the 21st place, 2 places lower than last year, as an investment location country. So it's not quite attractive. The leading countries, according to this World Bank report, which is published every year, as you know, are Singapore, New Zealand, United States, Canada, and Hong Kong, China in this order. And the main reason the World Bank economists give to this mediocre situation of Germany is that the labor market is overregulated, which is quite the view which many economists in Germany have on this issue. Again, some data, some figures. In the 90s, Germany was still a net capital import country. In short, as a result, current account deficits, quite in line with this theory. Since 2001, Germany has become a net capital export country and has achieved current account surpluses in 2005, now in the order of 4% of GDP. Now there are two interpretations which we can give, a positive and negative, to this capital movements. The first one is that capital exports occur because investment or capital or savings flow to the best host in the world market. It is where the expected returns to capital are relatively high. Made because they are rapidly growing markets, like China, or because they are economies with relatively low cost of production, as is the case currently in Central and Eastern Europe. Under these circumstances, the flows of capital, also the export of capital from Germany, means an improvement in efficiency of capital allocation, and this is a positive sign. The negative side of the coin is that net capital export could have become too high. Too high in the sense that it reflects an excess of domestic savings over the information, what really adds to potential output, to potential capacities. Net investment ratio lowest among OECD countries, less than 3% of net domestic products. Most investment in Germany is replacement investment, but replacement investment does not increase production capacities significantly. So we have an investment gap, and this investment gap is, from my point of view, a very good indicator that we have a locational weakness in Germany. So the story means that companies can be international competitive, whereas as a location, the country is not competitive. Companies can do profitable business while they entirely disconnect from national economic politics. So this is what a number of surveys, also by the Chamber of Industry and Commerce in Germany right now, has been shown that many companies in Germany just don't listen to what they discuss in Berlin, because they say, well, they have no idea, they don't really make the economic policies which we consider to be the adequate, so we just forget it, we disconnect. And we take the whole world marketplace as basis for our decisions, and sometimes we invest a little bit in Germany, and then we invest more in Poland, or in Brazil, or in China, or in the United States. Now, locational competition took place on the factor markets, I mean the market for capital, and has a lot of determinants. And among the determinants, we can identify labor costs, tax burden on capital and labor, regulations, environmental requirements, bureaucracy, and so on. And these conditions, if we take them all together, in their accumulation, are perceived as being excessive and straining, especially when we compare to other countries. And this is what we have to do, because in the world of globalized financial markets, capital is highly mobile, and we cannot hold it just in Germany. Then we have in Germany a number of staging political debates on capitalism. The former chairman of the Social Democratic Party and now Federal White Chancellor and Minister of Labour and Social Affairs, he equated global financial investors with swarms of locusts. Don't say it by mad people, you know, these investors, and we have to be very careful about this. I mean, this is not something which really creates a good image of the country as location. It's location for investment. Then we introduce now a new tax on the top of the income tax, which is called the rich people's tax. You know, just to satisfy envy preferences among the in the society. I mean, these are all things which scare away foreign companies, which encourage domestic firms to look for locations abroad, which cause a brain drain through immigration of skilled people. Germany is now the country number one in the European Union with a net emigration of qualified people coming from the universities. So we are losing human capital, this factor which I mentioned at the beginning as the crucial factor for economic growth. And at the same time, we do not have a brain gain through immigration of talented foreign professionals. In the late 2004, for which we have the more recent figures, the stock of German foreign direct investment amounted to 670 billion euro. Most of this investment were made in the European Union and in the United States, and more of them are market-oriented. Market-oriented, this means that they are made to open up new markets, to support traditional export business, and also to get part of this imported parts and components which then are introduced into export activity. So far the things are all right, this is positive and can explain very well also by theory. But then we have also a part of FDI which is carried out for cost-cutting reasons, and this normally is related with negative unemployment effects in Germany when jobs are redeployed abroad. And now the politicians, or some politicians and union leaders, criticize this behavior of companies, this investment abroad, looking for lower costs, as something which they call unpatriotic. And I think here is a conceptual confusion, because from an economic point of view, jobs which are redeployed abroad are jobs which are already obsolete in our own country, because they are too expensive in comparison to what the company can earn by selling the product on the market at a reasonable profit. And this applies mainly to low qualified jobs. You remember that I mentioned at the beginning that we have a particular problem in Germany with unskilled workers for which wages are too high. So the alternative for the company, if it would not invest abroad and take jobs with this investment abroad, the alternative would be to make rationalization investments at home and to abolish the jobs by substituting capital for labor, as it has happened markedly over the last 15 years. So it's better at least to invest abroad and to get some of this bazaar effect, which I mentioned, which may help at least to maintain part of production and employment at home, than by abolishing it at all. It is true that the Central and Eastern European member countries of the European Union are becoming particularly attractive for this sort of offshoring and outsourcing for two reasons. These countries are very low-cost, labor-cost countries, but at the same time, and this makes a difference to the traditional developing country, at the same time the workers are very skilled and can easily be motivated to improve performance. This makes them very attractive for German companies. Germany, by the way, is a country with most FDI in the eastern of Europe, particularly in the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland. Now, labor costs are one of the reasons for this offshoring and outsourcing of production. A second factor which plays a role, from the German point of view, is taxation. The taxation of corporate profits, and what it means is the effective taxation, not only the tariffs, but everything related to depreciation allowances, methods of financing, and other parameters. They are very complicated models which we use to calculate the effective taxation of companies. And the result is that Germany is a high tax country. We have the highest effective taxation of companies in the European Union, in spite of some reforms which have been carried out in recent years, but still we have the highest effective taxation. It's now in the order of 36%. Other member countries like Ireland have 14.7%. Austria, where many German companies have settled, shows an effective exchange tax burden on 23%. And if we move to our new member countries in Central and East Europe, we have a range between 16.7% in Slovakia and 22.9% in the Czech Republic. I mean, even lower than in the old European Union. And if you go to Estonia, then you find that non-distributed profits of companies are not taxed, not taxed at all. Well, this, of course, is something which companies consider. You know, everybody, if he can save taxes, he will do so. Everybody, on a legal way. Then there are others who do it even on an illegal way. But on the legal way, it's quite normal to do so, and you can do it today, because thanks to the dramatic reduction of transaction costs, economic transaction costs, thanks to the new information and communication technologies, you can diversify your production activities between different locations all in the world. It's not necessary to do it all in Germany. The normal reaction, again, by the politicians is to say these countries in Central and Eastern Europe are doing tax dumping. Tax dumping. And they even threatened by Germany and France that they will be, the financial support which they received from European Union structural funds may be reduced, you know, in order to force them to increase their taxation on companies. This criticism is wrong. According to economic theory, you could only call it dumping if these eastern countries had granted more favorable tax conditions to foreign investors than they do to domestic investors. But they don't behave that way. They just have lower taxes, company taxes. And the fiscal revenues which they need, they put the emphasis on indirect taxes, value-added taxes and so on, because they know, and they are right, because it's what we know from theory, that indirect taxes, value-added taxes, do not affect negatively capital formation, while direct taxes do. So they are making a good fiscal policy, good taxation policies, and there's no reason to convince them to make wrong policies, like Germany and other European countries, and by doing so, to slow down their economic growth and reduce their employment possibilities. Well, to come to some conclusions, the first thing I would do is that I'm absolutely convinced that there is an opportunity for Germany to do better than in the last 15 years. If structural reforms are undertaken, this is a condition. And to say this means that what is required is a thorough overhaul of virtually all central policies and institutional arrangements that have traditionally defined the German economy. Which refers to the labor market, to the social security system, to the tax system, to regulation of product and service markets, to the educational system. The recent PISA study of OECD, which has been published 2 days ago, 3 days ago, again shows that now the universities in Germany are not in a good shape. It also relates to administrative procedures for doing business and so on. This is what we call in Germany structural reforms. In every of these fields, you have really to change things fundamentally, not minor fixes. Really structural changes. You have to do structural changes. And if you do this, then we have a very interesting study by the Cologne-based Institute for Business Research, which shows that in this case, if we really improve the supply side of the economy, Germany could boost its trend rate of growth in a magnitude of 2.5% a year. This would really be a big step upwards. And I think that the German government has a special responsibility to do it. We are the biggest economy in the European Union and also in the Eurozone, about 1/3. And if Germany doesn't really move, then you know it acts as a brake, you know, for the rest of the area. And besides that, who sets a good example for others, making structural reforms, can gain leadership at the European Council and at World Economic Summits, and will also be able to generate elsewhere in other countries, which also may need reforms, the willingness to undertake those reforms. In times of globalization, economic policies becomes more difficult. This is true. Because economic policies also now is under competition with economic policies undertaken elsewhere. And if your economic policy is not good enough to make your location attractive for foreign investment, then foreign investment will not come and domestic investment will go abroad, as I explained to you. But the government still can act in times of globalization. I mean, there are some people saying that the state is not longer able to do anything in times of globalization. I think it's just nonsense. Of course, there is ample room of maneuver for economic policies. What you cannot do any longer is to interfere ad libitum with economic processes, and that you have to respect the rules of the market and of competition. And I think this is not a disadvantage for a country, but is an advantage for the country, because it has proven once and again everywhere in the world that competition is the best way to solve problems and to lead a country out of its economic mess. So a sensitive economic policy would make use of this market mechanism for the attainment of economic growth and employment objectives. And I hope that the German government will do so. the latest when Germany takes over the presidency in the European Union, which will happen the first half of next year, the government will have to make it clear that it's going to steer the country on an arduous reform course. And this really would be good news for the rest of the world. I may close with a quotation from Albert Einstein. He once stated, quote, "The problems which exist in the world are not solved by the same way of thinking which has caused them." Unquote. And I think this applies to Germany too. Thank you very much.